Well, we're still working on the massive project of all massive projects.
But it's coming along.
It really is, and I'm pleasantly surprised.
I was so intimidated, I didn't even know how this is going to happen, but here it is.
This has just been an empty space on the railroad for years, and I've just been going, nah. Anyway, here we dive in, and away you go.
Exactly.
The 65-foot turntable for the Rio Grande on our railroad, we're duplicating pretty much this turntable, the one in Durango, Colorado.
Nice.
In our very large scale, F-scale, 120.3, just the bridge on this thing comes out to 39 inches, and the whole assembly is 48 inches across.
Oh, it's crazy.
So here's where we were at, and over the last couple of weeks we've been building the base for this and the turntable pit. And then when last we spoke, we were adding the top to this, and it kind of slides in underneath the existing homosode. And that leaves about a 1.5 inch gap between the top and the section that's the footings for the ring rail.
Yes.
And so our next project now is to fill in the 1.5 inch gap. And so the gap is going to be filled in with this extruded foam. Cutting out the basic shapes that'll go in there is fairly easy, so I'm starting by just cutting it into some small blocks that I can put into the gap in the pit. One of the difficulties is going to be that the thickness isn't right. And so these blocks, once they're cut out into workable sizes that I can put into the sides of the pit, I've now got to come back and cut the other dimension, the thickness of the block, to make that the accurate thickness to go in between the top layer and the ring rail layer. The trick with all of these pieces that I'm making right now is that they've got to be absolutely square. Otherwise, there's going to be gaps and problems. So I've got to work with the fence here on my cutting tool to ensure that these are absolutely square and will slide neatly between the two layers. At that point, I can slide them into place and then use a Sharpie to mark out the exact curvature that now needs to be cut in here. And this too is critical, that it be perfectly square up and down so that the sides of the pit don't angle in or angle out. They need to be absolutely straight up and down. So as I'm cutting the curvature here, I need to be sure that it's also held tightly on the cutting machine, and that the wire is set at exactly straight up and down, exactly 90 degrees, to ensure that the sides of the pit are perfectly square, perfectly straight up and down. The end of the bridge, of course, rides very, very close to the walls on the turntable pit, and so if anything protrudes out, the bridge is going to snag on it. So I want to ensure that it exactly matches the wood, and that it's at exactly 90 degrees to the floor of the pit, to the ring rail footing below the wall. There are a few minor discrepancies. It's straight up and down, but there are a few places where it doesn't exactly match the wood. And moreover, there's a lot of texture left from the cutting wire. These vertical lines that, well, they're very unsightly. They don't look anything like a cement wall. And so I need to smooth that out and bring it around to a much smoother texture, as well as getting rid of the areas where it extends out past the wood ring, the upper ring, and especially places where the bridge is hitting it. I don't want it to be perfectly smooth, because my plan is to print out these really nasty looking cement wall textures that I found online, and then I'm going to print those and glue those to the wall, and if I do it correctly, it will pick up some of the texture of the wall behind. So I don't want it to be perfectly smooth, but it has to be straight up and down enough and smooth enough that this texture can be put on there successfully. So I used my Sureform tool, that little handheld plane, and went around here with that, and yeah, that really straightened up the sides, but I screwed up. There's always the opportunity to screw up. And as I went around, I was undercutting the wall, making the bottom of it slightly further in than the top, getting rid of my nice square line that I put in there with the cutting tool. You can easily see the problem here. There's the guideline marked on the ring rail footing, and now the foam is slightly in from that. And it doesn't seem like that would be much of an issue. It looks okay. But when I put my texture on there, there's nothing behind it to attach to at the bottom. And that's a problem. I need to bring these walls around to absolutely straight up and down. Otherwise, my concrete textures are just not going to go on here and look correct. Moreover, the way I'm going to put this on here, it will pick up the texture behind it, and right now the texture behind it is the extruded foam and the edge of the plywood. So my plan is to use Perfitape mud and go all the way around here and bring it back into square, as well as creating a texture which will hide the edge of the plywood and the seam between the foam and the plywood, and even create something of a texture that looks a bit more like the concrete wall, the cement wall that I'm going to be putting the texture over. And it's key that the trowel that I'm using, the knife, has an absolutely square corner. That way, as long as I hold it tight up against the footing here for the ring rail, I should end up with a nice square corner, bringing my wall back into perfectly vertical. There's a little bit of this vertical line effect again, which I don't care for. It doesn't work with my cement wall, so I'm going to do a little bit of light sanding, but being very careful to not undercut the wall to make sure I keep it absolutely square to the footing and absolutely straight up and down, so that as I apply my paper texture over the top of it, it goes on neatly and squarely over the wall and picks up the texture from behind. As I'm going, I'm also getting some plaster here on the ring rail footing, and that's all got to be cleaned completely off, because as I glue the ties on here, they have to be absolutely square to that footing, but mostly they have to be attached very securely, and that's not going to work if I'm gluing them to plaster. And so just a bit of very careful sanding, being careful to not undercut the wall like I did with the foam, and making sure I'm cleaning it completely off of the footings. I'm ready now to apply my cement textures over the top of this. I found several different cement wall textures that I liked online, and now I'm going to take these various images into Photoshop and blend them together in such a way that they look nice and they look like a cast concrete wall, as well as tiling neatly with each other so that there isn't a really obvious seam where the individual images come together. But these are really nice looking textures, and if I layer them very carefully to each other, I think I can come up with something that looks pretty darn cool. So I'm just doing a test here to see how well this is going to tuck up against that plaster. Is it going to pick up some of that plaster texture? Is it going to look hokey? Is it going to look printed out? Or is it going to look nice? And I think it's going to work really well. One downside that I'm finding is my plan was to have the paper rather wet with a white glue backing on it, and as it's wet, boy, that ink wants to come right off, so I have to be very careful. At any rate, this was just a test. I need to get the plaster on the bottom of the pit first. I don't want to try doing that once the texture's in place, otherwise I might screw up the texture. So I've got a few things I want to take care of first. So now that the inside edge of the pit is filled in, I need to fill in the outside edge with 2 layers of plywood and blend that together in such a way that it's a nice, beautiful, finished edge and just is nice, uniform layers of plywood stacking up on top of each other.
Well, this has turned out really neat. It kind of reminds me of the heel on a cowboy boot or something. we should leave it like this. I like it.
And I completely agree. Everything else on the front edge is finished with oil and a clear coat, so I think I'll do that too.
Right.
But that shouldn't change it much, and I think it's going to continue its look. I want to keep it looking as close to this as humanly possible.
Oh, I love it.
And I figured while I'm putting oil and finish on that front part of the turntable, I may as well go ahead and do that to the entire front of the layout here in front of the engine shop. The blue edge of the OSB board here, which looks pretty gnarly, is covered up by a strip of finished wood from Home Depot with a pattern to it. That hides that. And then everywhere else I'm putting my standby Watco Danish wood oil on everything, and then I'm going to put a clear coat over that. I'm just using their natural wood color, and on the face board here you hardly see that going on, but on the edge of the plywood you can see that it actually brings out it brings out the dark colors and really brings those layers to life. I usually put this on with a brush just because it's so much easier to control that way, but according to Watco, you should put it on with a cloth. But just given what I'm doing, that doesn't quite seem to work out, and so I typically will just put it on with a brush. But I do come back with a cloth because they suggest putting it on with a cloth and then coming back after it's been on there for a while and had a chance to soak in, and then wipe any excess off of the surface, because it can leave a kind of a sticky, goopy surface on here if you don't get the excess oil off with a cloth. And then be very careful to get the cloth outside in the trash, or preferably in some kind of an airtight container, because oddly enough this stuff can self-combust and just catch fire. So don't leave your oily rags just laying around. The oil is bringing out the dark colors.
Right.
But I like that.
I do too, because it almost looks like, sedimentary rock or something.
Wow, yeah. At first I was a little disappointed because I like the lighter color, but this oil does lighten up as it dries.
Right.
And the more I look at it, the more I'm going, wow, I actually really like that.
Soil layers.
Yeah, I was just sort of used to it in the lighter color. But yeah, I actually really like that.
I love it.
I also opted to do some light sanding on here after wiping off the excess. It just puts a nice smoother surface on here, and it lightens up the color just a little bit, and I like the look of coming back with a little bit of light sanding after the oil has had a chance to soak in and dry. In a few of these places, I think I'm going to apply a little more oil, especially on the faceboard there. And then the final coat will be to come over all of this with a clear coat, a clear urethane probably. That's what I've done over on the switching yard, and it looks quite nice. It was about at this point that somebody said, you know what that looks like is a roulette wheel.
Yes, it does.
It hadn't really occurred to me, but yeah, it looks a whole lot like a Las Vegas roulette wheel. About the same size, same shape, same pretty much everything.
Just doesn't have a marble.
Good. and you can't lose any money on it. Well, actually, we've poured a lot of money into it, but we haven't lost the money.
Or our marbles.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel like I am losing my marbles. But I'm really happy with the look of the whole front of the railroad now. It'll look a little bit different once the clear coat is on there. But it's furniture.
Right.
And I love a nice presentation on the railroad. And I think this just looks great.
It does.
Bought these metal signs while we were, I think we actually got them in the gift shop at Antonito.
I think so.
But they're really cool, and we bought several different locations along the Cumbers and Toltec. And since this is Chama, it's getting the Chama sign.
I love it. It's just so cool.
And now one of the toughest parts of any project, and that's figuring out just what the next step should be. One thing I can work on here is the texture for the concrete walls. Another project I could move on to is the sides for the bridge. Our friend Dwayne brought over the plastic sides that he made on his CNC router. And those are going to look just great on there. And there's going to be surface detail and other things that need to go on there, as well as painting. Another project is the ring rail. And here again, Dwayne made this great template for us that actually mounts to the turntable pit. And that will establish an absolutely perfect circle for the ring rail. And the pieces that he cut out interconnect like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle and lay neatly on top of the footing for the ties and the ring rail. And so this is going to be a great guide to laying in the ring rail to keep it absolutely circular. He also cut out this screed so that we can put that on the center mount for the turntable bridge, and then just pull this around as we put plaster on the bottom of the pit, forming an absolutely perfect bottom for the pit. So there's a project that we can be working on. So what's up next? Option number one, we can put in the bottom of the pit using the screed that Dwayne made us. Option number two is making the ring rail, and that's actually a pretty substantial project because it involves doing the texture on the walls, putting the ties up against the textured wall, and then fabricating the ring rail and putting that in place on top of the ties. So that's a pretty substantial project. Option number three is something that I've been sort of putting off and shouldn't be, and that's getting the soundboard up to the pit so that I can take that over to where the roundhouse is going to sit and figure out where the footings need to be for the roundhouse. So that's another pretty substantial project and something that really needs to be done. Another option is the steel sides for the bridge. Now that I've got the plastic parts for building that, I could go ahead and start assembling the plastic sides for the bridge. And the winner is the soundboard and footings for the roundhouse. If there's anything wrong, if there's any adjustment that I need to make, now is the time to find out that something's not in alignment. So let's get the soundboard in, figure out exactly where the tracks are going to go over to the roundhouse, and get the footings installed for the roundhouse. Everything outside of the roundhouse is going to be done in this soundboard, and that means putting another layer onto the turntable pit. That thing's getting quite thick at this point, but I need to bring the soundboard all the way around there so that I can bring tracks off of the turntable at the right side, and then the actual floor and footings for the roundhouse is going to be plywood. And so let's go ahead and figure that out and get it in place as well. Anyway, this is where we'll be picking it up next week.
I hope not. It better stay in place after all this work.
I've picked up the individual pieces. I wouldn't want to pick up the whole thing now.
No, it's nailed in there tight, right?
I should say this is where we'll be continuing on
good.
with the continuing saga of building the turntable and Roundhouse, which will be coming up at some point. At any rate, if you're not a subscriber to the channel, please subscribe. And you can do that by clicking on the upcoming blue button. Zoink! Right there, the blue button. Well, we're not sure how you found this video on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring. And we will see you here on Tuesday.
Right.
We'll see ya.
We'll see ya.
Bye.
Bye.